Hello and welcome to the School of Innovation podcast. I'm your host, Yaniv, and today I'm joined by my good friend and fellow MIT alum, Daniel Rosenberg. Daniel is a designer of innovative spaces, products, and tangible technologies that merge our increasingly disconnected digital and physical experiences. He is the creator of a design method that combines mindful awareness and human-computer interaction. He truly embodies the MIT vision-driven, interdisciplinary, and hands-on culture of R&D and design. He is a researcher, collaborator, educator, team leader, and so much more. So please welcome Daniel Rosenberg. Daniel Rosenberg, welcome to the School of Innovation.
Hello, thanks for having me.
How are you doing, my friend?
I'm good. I'm excited about talking to you today.
Likewise. We don't get to do this often, and when we record it, it's even better. There's more pressure to say smart stuff.
We'll see what we can say. Yeah. It's better to forget. It's better to forget that we are recording.
Exactly. Look, the internet has a short memory, and podcasts, they come and go. So hopefully, we won't make uh, too much of a jackasses out of ourselves, and people will get some value from this episode. I want to actually, before we get started, I want to give some context to our listeners and mention episode number 9 with our good friend Christine Utram, who is today the CEO of Everyday. And the reason I mention that episode, dear listeners, is that on that episode, if you haven't listened to it, Christine and I talk about a certain Daniel Rosenberg. And that same Daniel Rosenberg is the Daniel Rosenberg who's on this episode of the School of Innovation. So I'm very happy. And what we talk about there, and and sort of just to frame the conversation today, is this idea that you and Daniel and that Daniel and I had that architects are perhaps or could be potentially become exceptional entrepreneurs. And we're trying, being architects ourselves, and the three of us, you, Daniel, myself, and Christine, have all started in architecture. Our background is in architecture, but none of us is engaged in architecture today in sort of like the classic sense, right? We don't design buildings or structures or anything like that. And so we started talking about that, as why did that happen, and how come what we learned in architecture school has translated, or we've been able to apply it so well into other disciplines, specifically I think innovation and entrepreneurship. There's something there that I think is interesting to explore. So with that in mind, I introduce you,
Thank
my
you.
good friend Daniel Rosenberg.
One clarification though. I take architecture currently as kind of my hobby, I will say. So I love architecture and still on the side. Like I don't take it to be my main work, but I've been, for example, I just finished designing a building, a house extension for a client, which is kind of like on the side.
Really?
Yeah.
I did not know that. You still
Yeah.
engage in architecture
but
design.
no, but this is to me, no, it's like some people that I know, so it's not like I
A pet
don't get
project.
paid. I don't get paid too much. It's more like like a hobby to me. I really like it, and I think it's something that I don't feel like, I don't know. I don't feel that is something on my past that I don't want to relate to it again. I think it's just something there that I like doing, and I don't know. I feel like connected to, and it's fun. So, uh, but then also wanted to say that I listened to your podcast with Christine, and really nice to hear you guys talking about your story and Christine's story, and as you said, I mean, we have very nice memories studying together at MIT and talking about entrepreneurship, innovation, and architecture constantly when we talk. So I think that was maybe some of the context of why we are kind of formalizing this today through today podcast. So I'm happy to connect with that conversation. Although I think Christine took a very different road that I've taken, but uh,
Yes, that's right. That's right. That's right. And we're gonna get to that, and and I think we're gonna explore some of the same things, I guess, but at some point we're gonna diverge, and I really want to dig into things like the state of architectural studies today, like what's happening in architecture today and how people study it. Why would you want to learn architecture? um, what can you do with an architecture degree? Like I'm assuming that even today, this was the issue back then, but even today, like there's a huge inventory of architects. There isn't possibly enough work for all of them, so they either work for basically nothing, right, just to get the experience, or they're stuck doing something else. So I want to explore all these things, okay?
yeah, definitely.
But
Yeah,
before we get started,
yeah.
walk our listeners through your experience, your background. You're originally from Chile.
I'm originally from Israel.
Oh my God. Okay.
Yeah, but then I moved to Chile when I was
Okay.
4, so my accent is mixing up a little bit of the Israeli accent and the Latin American Spanish accent.
Hmm?
So yeah, so in Chile I would have more of a Israeli accent. I cannot pronounce the R's, for example. But
Really? I did not know that.
yeah, but yeah, yeah. So basically, yeah, I come from these two worlds. But I will say I lived most of my life in Chile, and then uh, I guess I studied architecture at the Catholic University there, which is a very good architecture school, very traditional architecture school. For example, Alejandro Aravena, who is a preacher, traditional architect, is Chilean, and it's a good school, I will say. And I think I have a good foundation. And also, when I studied there, we had, I went through the transition into, the computer aided design. So I learned most of it by, drafting and hand, hand, and the craft of making things by hand, and then also the computational side. But then I got bored, I will say, and I guess I will kind of jump from being in love with architecture and being bored of it. But I got bored from being designing buildings, I will say, and I was looking for other things to do, and I found this program at MIT, which was the design and computation program, which I got really excited about because it seems to be kind of like a door that of course started from the architecture but connected with other things, like the for example the media lab type of work. So I was very excited about going there, and I did my master and phd. I stayed for phd, and I kind of got really into kind of like almost I felt like I started over, and I studied a new thing, but I got interested in analog and digital electronics. But then my interest got involved with into experience design, but maybe a little bit different to what people. I I, I got interested in experience before I realized there was a field that it was kind of growing at that time in the context of UX, the user experience
Right.
design world.
Interaction design. Yeah.
Exactly. But I was more interested in what is the experience of the designs that we create, and in connection to the experience of the design process. So that was my PhD, was kind of thinking through the process and tools to kind of aid designers, not only architects. I'll say designers, to think about their experience as they are designing something for other people's experience. And it's
Right.
kind of like
You were going deep
a very
into
I went
tacit knowledge. You
I
were
went
going deep.
Yeah, I went really deep into, I got to, I realized the experts in experience are, are the Buddhists. So I got into Vipassana, and I incorporated I started going to the Cambridge Insight Meditation Center. That
I
is great.
remember.
And
Yeah,
I most of the background on my dissertation was kind of weird because it related things coming from the Vipassana, tradition, and electronics, and the way people were talking in the technology world about user experience. So yeah,
who was your advisor? Remind me for the PhD.
was George Steiny. Uh,
Steiny?
yeah,
Yeah.
and then really important to me, Edith Ackerman, who unfortunately
Yes.
died a couple of years ago. She was really great.
Right.
And then Terry Knight was really supportive, was also
Yeah.
part of this. And then after graduating, I guess I was looking for options outside, of course, architecture, and I was a little bit bored of the academic world. So I joined a small little group of Media Lab people, like a design studio in Brooklyn. And it was kind of like, like a service at that time, working for also like art installation, things like that. Very, in a very, like in an almost abandoned building in Brooklyn with very interesting interesting people. But then somehow we got a couple of larger projects and we start growing. And after a couple of years, when I started, we were 3 people. Then we became 25 people. The company was called Midnight Commercial, and kind of we found ourselves growing and getting larger projects, but we didn't know what we were doing from the, I would say, from the business perspectives. And then we were doing projects for Target, like a future robotic store for Target. We were working for Google Ara, developing like a kind of like a mini aquarium with living organisms inside your smartphone type of thing. But then also once some of this project ended or completed or whatever, we did not know how to survive and we grew too much. And then basically, I think we had to close the doors, and then that was it. It was a great experience, I will say, learning. I became a partner of this company and head of design, and I find myself managing teams, dealing, with budgets and scope of works and things like that. So it's a different model from a startup model. It's not the same.
Right.
It's
It's an
still,
agency model. Yeah.
yes, I would say we were in a mix between an experiential agency, but we also try to provide external R&D to companies. Like the Target and the Google projects were basically external R&D for those companies.
You're exploring things with those brands on the edges of their business, right? This was not part of their core business. There was kind of exploratory projects on the edges of the business. And so when funding became sort of an issue, which happens in a lot of these cases, we were seeing it now with COVID-19. Typically those projects are the ones that get terminated first, right?
Yeah, and that happened, I will say, with the Target project and then also with the Google project. That same thing happened. Yeah, they change sometime. There's a change on some vision for the company, and I think they cut all their innovation type of projects at that time, and one of those was this robotic store, which was about to get built. I mean, it was like a brick and mortar building with all technologies and different
Embedded inside,
yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly. And all the and we were kind of, I guess, also we work a little bit as a consultant in a way, but yeah. So then I think this was not a sustainable business model for us. It was really, really hard to get these big projects. Later, I've learned the mistakes we made and the type of project we maybe should have been doing as a way to also get, keep us alive.
Right. Keep the doors open. Yeah.
Exactly. But after that, I went back. So I got okay bored of practice, and I kind of wanted to come back to academia. So on the one hand, I kept myself, as a consultant, and I've been involved with certain projects. But I also start teaching at the at RPI, at the Center of Architecture, Science, and Technology, called CASE in Brooklyn, where I'm also, I started an initiative about human-computer interaction and the built environment, and we are also building a new entrepreneurship program for architects. So this is kind of like a new space for me to explore, which is aligned with what we're going to be discussing in this
That's
in this
amazing.
podcast. Yeah. And then I'm doing consultant work for, I've been somehow got into the entertainment space, with working with some companies on, again, very big projects, for what they call location-based entertainment. And it's a easy way to explain this is kind of a mix between Disney and Broadway, basically combining musicals with immersive, experiences, interactive spaces, that people go and explore and want to kind of listen to like a musical, but at the same time live within that space. That's the whole cycle, going from
That's
academia
incredible,
to
man.
practice to academia to,
As you're talking about the stuff that you do, I'm thinking, yeah, man, I should talk to this guy more often. I mean, he's he's like doing so much stuff. Um, okay, I literally could not keep track of all the stuff that you're currently doing or have done and are doing, but it's amazing. I want to sort of try to refocus our conversation around this point that you mentioned, and maybe it connects to what you're doing at Case. It sounds like this place of creative economy, creative leadership slash entrepreneurship, like where architecture meets
but
entrepreneurship.
I think I will talk about design and entrepreneurship more than architecture, because and this is some of the thing I think we probably were gonna discuss, but I see architects as designers more than architects. Or I think the uh, I don't know, even the notion architecture is not a verb. You cannot it's not like
You cannot
design.
architect. Yeah,
Yeah, you cannot I mean, maybe you can, I don't know, but it's not used much, I would say. And basically architects design, and people may think that they design buildings, and they do design buildings, but one of the things that I've learned from my own experience and from my teaching and also my professional experience, that the architects are really, I don't know, whenever I have a team, a design team, they're really great designers, and they can engage in I mean, I can have, I mean, not to talk bad about other design disciplines, but I have even, user experience designers or interaction designers in some of the projects that I'm engaged with. And architects really kind of, they don't have any problem in engaging in this type of projects. And
really, they're much
usually
more versatile.
yeah, and they can even, I don't want to say that they could be better, because maybe the type of projects that I do are kind of like
Dude,
mixing.
you can say that. You can say that. We want to piss off all the other designers,
No,
and we're on the side of architects. Yes, you can say that. Go
okay,
ahead. I'm giving you
okay,
permission.
I'll say it. So in my teams, usually the architects that are bring to my teams they excel other designers, and
They're
maybe
so much better than all the other
yeah,
designers.
and maybe not much, not much because of the design itself, but the way they deal with the process. Because they usually in the projects that I engage with, and a lot of this type of innovation, I will imagine projects when you don't know what you're creating before you start, right? It's kind of like a weird, and people get really anxious if you go to a team and tell them, okay, guys, we need to build something, but I don't know what it is, and we need to try things out. They are like, I don't know what. Tell us what to build. Tell us. Do you need us to build this? Like, an app or something. And I think that's one part that I think architects are used to deal with that uncertainty. And then there's this space also of collaboration and openness to feedback. I think they're trained so in architecture school, they're trained so much to present things and get destroyed by the reviews, that they don't take things personally.
Yes,
And sometimes when I work with other designers, I mean, I'm trying to tell them, look, this is not about you. I know you worked a lot, but this is not the right thing to do, and we need to do it again, right? It's not. There's nothing wrong with doing it again. That's the way the design process works, right?
iterations. Yeah.
Iteration and trying things, failing, trying it again, presenting things to the team or to the clients, and getting feedback and keep moving. And architects, I'll say, through their education, that's what they basically learn. To me, they learn that process of going through the process of creating something new through iteration and being able to deal with uncertainty, take feedback and improve. Um, and, and this is not an easy thing. And some other designers or engineers have a hard time with that. They want and they struggle because they keep telling the designer, you told me that the hardware, the software should be doing this, and now you told me that should be doing something different. And you said, okay, that's fine, that's the way it should go.
I think you're onto something interesting here with the crits, like with the charrettes or crits or critiques or whatever you want to call them, where like for the listeners who haven't, and I'm assuming it's all of them who haven't who didn't go to architecture school, which is perfectly fine, by the way. We're not, we're not biased. We're not. Um,
We have a lot of bad things to say about architecture school
we
too.
have a lot of bad things to say about architects. Yes,
Yeah.
just stick with us for a minute here. But this in like in when you study architecture, your main course or main activity is the studio, is where you are presented with different design challenges, and you're supposed to research them and come up with solutions and at the end of the day come up with a design that responds to all or most of the design challenges or the design challenge, and then you're supposed to present it like through the whole process. You're presenting everything that you do every single time you're in the studio to your advisors, but at the end of the semester or the end of the project, whatever that may be, um, you stand in front of everyone and stand in front of the studio. Usually there's a panel and you present your case, right? You present your solution, you present how you got to that solution, you present everything. And what proceeds to happen is you get, I'll say it politely, you get a lot of feedback. Typically it's very harsh.
The process that is really interesting is the desk crit, where you basically work through where your professor,
Exactly.
almost like a mentor, you meet with them and show them your work as as you are creating the work.
Exactly.
It's a
Exactly.
yeah, it's an interesting space of a kind of, which is the same way it happens where you are developing a project in the company where I was the head of design. I will have to do the same thing with the designers, right? To sit with them, ask them to show me what they are building, tell them, maybe try this in this way, giving them feedback. So it becomes this, you have this larger, crits, or like reviews, and then smaller ones within, the day or the week, constantly. Yeah.
Yes, we used to have them twice. Like when we had studio on Sundays and Wednesdays, so twice a week we had studio. It's like it took the entire day, like from morning till night, usually. And yes, you'd have these desk crits and reviews, and sometimes the professor, advisor, whatever, would get a like if there was something interesting in your project to talk about, he may like bring a couple of other people, other students, together and like use you for better or worse as an example for something that they want to discuss.
Yeah. The other thing is interesting from the studio model, which is basically a project-based model, which has become more relevant, I think, today, and used in other, that's the model of the MIT Media Lab, for example, I will say, is the idea that although there is some sort of ask at the beginning, it's very general, and actually the teacher or the professor of the studio doesn't really know what he or she wants, and basically there's some general topic, and then basically the students with the, of course, with the professor end up, creating these products that are also, you can have like three or four amazing and the best projects, and they could be different from each other. So it's not really, like limiting the space of design or inquiry around a specific solution to a problem. Actually, like it's much more open, and this doesn't have to be, like a predefined solution to a problem or something like that. That I've also been teaching innovation, to, business students or engineers, and usually they are very problem solving oriented, so they want to know what the problem is, and they want to solve it in a very, linear way, and because they are address the problem that way, you can have different people working and they're going to come up with very similar solutions. Whereas in the context of a more open-ended design process, it's more about setting up the problem or opportunities, open up new spaces for things, for different things to happen. uh, and in that context, different, you're creating worlds, so in a way you are, kind of, coming up with, it's more important to ask the right questions than to find the answers to predefined questions.
Yeah. Let's take a pause here because I want to touch on a subject that I think is super relevant here and something that I think a lot of people misunderstand or misinterpret, which is this idea of design thinking. And I'm sure you've heard of it, right? It's sort of this huge buzzword. So relating to what you just said, I think this idea of design thinking, and what I think people don't understand is that yes, it's structured as a linear process, right? It's a process that aims to bring people from point A to point B, right? In a very structured way, but it has nothing to do with reality or how reality works. It doesn't work like that. It's never a linear process, a very structured process. And I'd even go a step further and say that design thinking is it's sort of a meta theory for how to apply design tools and methodologies to, let's say, business problems, but it's not like a recipe.
I think, on the one hand, I think there's something very really great that happened because of design thinking, is that these people that basically are coming from the business world put the word design at the core of this approach, and I think it turns, the interest on again, I think, on the design process and designers.
Yeah, but not really. What happens at the end is that they try to cram this into a workshop, like this whole process of empathy up to blah, 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 into a workshop, a week long workshop. And at the end of that, they come up with shitty solutions, and they're like wondering why that thing happened, because they're missing the whole open-endedness of the process. This whole let's explore different spaces and find ways to connect the dots, and all of that.
No, I was just saying that in the context of more like a, almost political or a social context, in which, like certain universities or companies are being more interested in design lately. And I personally have experienced that, and I get invited to teach design to business schools, which has never happened before. And people got interested somehow in design because of design thinking. It has been a very good marketing, slogan for designers. But you're right about the process as a process that I will say in a way is strange, because they have this linear process and they kind of try to, you know, make the process explicit, which I also appreciate they're trying to do that. But I think they don't realize that whenever they go through that process, they're not really actually doing what they say they're doing. I will say that rules or a set of instructions allow them to feel more comfortable with this uncertainty that I was telling you before.
Yes.
Kind of, it's almost like a placebo for them to feel okay. We are going through this. We're in step three, where all is good. There's no problem.
Yeah, where are we? Where are we? You're
We
in
know
step
what
three.
we
Don't
know what
worry.
step four is, right? But in the process, things happen, and because they are doing things, they're gonna come up with something they did not expect, and they're gonna, you know, I will say that
Yes.
the more successful design thinking processes will probably kind of uh, change on, or like go out of that linear process to come up with something different that they were maybe trying to do, and then they will not be able to, be aware that the tools that they are using are kind of allowing them to move, to make a line on the white page, right? You need to be brave to make that line on the white page. So they can get it started, but then the process, actually they're not going through the process that they think they're going through. In a way, it works kind of, and it helps these people that were scared of design, business people and engineers, to kind of go and do it. I do like to think about design as design doing more than design
The
thinking.
design thinking, yeah, the thinking part. It that's also kind of an issue with designers or creative people. That there's a tendency to think perhaps too much, and then not execute, or like mess up on the execution.
And discover new unexpected things through doing
Yes.
more than, like, I like to give the example of a following a recipe. So if I follow up a recipe, I won't be able to make anything new, right? I will just, okay, I pick up the recipe for matzo ball soup, you know, and then you make the matzo ball soup, and your intention is of replicating that recipe.
Uh-huh.
When I deal more with the ingredients or with the process, and I trust on, or like throwing things into water, some carrots, some chicken there, and like mixing it up, and testing it and doing it and testing it,
Hmm.
I may come up with something different than a matzo ball soup or like a chicken soup, whatever. And then I will have to give it a name. And I will give it all these things, then they have to be named. And then you can sell them. And then you can say, look, I created the chicken, whatever, right? And then you open up a store in Brooklyn and get famous, and people want to make lines to get that thing. And then, the recipe doesn't take you too far.
The recipe doesn't take you too far, but you write like a recipe is IP, right? So you own the IP, you own the recipe.
After the fact, you can always write the recipe at the end.
Yes, that's right.
You can, yeah, at the end, you can always write the specs and the IP for your product, but to get there, you need to go through that doing process.
Mhm. What they teach in architecture school today, you're closer to this than I am. I assuming it hasn't changed that much. Am I wrong?
It doesn't change. I
O-
mean,
Okay.
I went to architecture school in Chile. I don't know, a long time ago. I don't even want to know calculate the years. But now I teach studio at the RPI School of Architecture. I take a different perspective to the studio, but I see and I go to reviews to other studios, and I don't see, apart from people using, the computers to make 3D models and renders,
Hmm.
which I don't, or 3D, or like, CAM, like to laser cut pieces or whatever.
Yeah. Or
Don't see any.
algorithmic architecture, anything like that, like stuff that's
I don't
generated
see
by
that.
computers.
Yeah, but that doesn't really change anything. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe the facade will be a little more. It will be like some curvature, like double curvature on the facade, but at the end,
Mhm.
I don't see how that has changed.
Same shit.
I think, yeah, it's not the. I think one of my problem with architecture school is the idea that maybe it's the opposite of design thinking. I think what these architects they're teaching, they don't know that what they are teaching, and they think they're teaching how to design buildings.
Hmm.
I think they're teaching how to design, period. And
It just happens to be buildings.
exactly, and it's great. But I think if you stop before the building is there's so much more
Well,
interesting.
well, well, well yeah, but hold on a second. I'm going to challenge you on this. I agree with what you're saying to a certain extent, but the fact that let's substitute building for space, right? Okay, so they are designing, not just designing, but they're designing in space. So there's a spatial, visual kind of aspect to it, no, more than visual, spatial aspect to it that I think is very, very valuable. It just happens to be, for buildings, but like, I don't know about you, but when we were studying when I was studying architecture, we were also studying urban design. So you can think about a city, right, as a different kind of space. So thinking in 3D, sometimes in 4D, right, and like in spatial terms, I think is valuable. I wouldn't dismiss that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And it's definitely give you a way of looking at the world and a way
Yes.
of being able to understand space and also materials,
Hmm.
like
Yeah.
and light and some user experience is very limited compared to the way user experience is understood in the technology world.
Hmm.
But there is some idea that people are going to walk through a space and you kind of are able to put yourself in that space and
Right.
design around that experience.
Right.
It's yeah, of course, and there's also the context of the program
Hmm.
and the functionality, and the structure and the materials, which can be translated to other products and not only buildings.
Hmm.
Uh, but definitely, you're right. Yes, space and maybe place. I like that
Yes.
word a little bit better.
Yeah.
It's definitely like, uh, and that's maybe the connecting tissue with the type of thing that I like doing in the technology and the innovation or entrepreneurship world, in the context of thinking about new technologies out of the limit of the flat two-dimensional screen,
Hmm.
which is kind of all over, and taking that into space,
Yeah.
into new materials, into new ways
Exactly.
for humans to interact with the computers through the walls or objects in space, colors that can change, non-emissive displays,
Right,
sensors, and
time, the fourth dimension. Things are transient, right? It's temporal, like things change. I think that's
yeah,
something that people a lot of times neglect when they design.
yeah. But also I think like this very limited, like jumping to the technology world, where
Hmm.
we don't see that we live in a paradigm that was created, a human computer interaction paradigm, where technology is thought as a screen, and it's very hard
Yeah.
to take that out. Like, we think about technology today mostly
Hmm.
from the user perspective, mostly as either a laptop with these things that you click and this thing that you move that we call a mouse, and a
Yeah.
screen with pixels and a speaker. And we don't realize that that was designed by someone. That way for us to relate with the computer was kind of designed. And then you have, of course, the little computer which you carry with you, which is basically just a smaller version of the same thing, which we call a smartphone. But it's basically, again, maybe you can
Hmm.
touch the screen, but apart from that, it's pretty much the same. And then taking that out into the space and into the place is something that I'm interested in, and I think architecture has a lot to say in that space. And we see that the industry, I think, is looking into that direction.
Hmm.
Like, I don't know, like Amazon is buying Whole Food Market,
Yeah.
Google, is interested into the physical and the physical world, and,
Hmm.
and and I think a lot of things are going to happen in that space. But unfortunately, architects and architecture is not being part of that conversation, and is still siloed in this studio environment, talking about Le Corbusier and these rockstar architects from the past, and like creating these buildings, and they don't see that they could be a contribution into that conversation of how space is being transformed today and in the future through this new technologies that are coming out of of the flat screen into the objects and materials around us.
Yeah, I agree. So let's try to. I'll recap a little bit, and then let's try to be helpful. Okay. So in terms of like recapping, we said that architecture studies today, architecture schools are essentially still stuck in the old paradigm of architectural design, right? But they do teach a lot of valuable. I guess it's a mindset. It's a set of skills. It's a suite or a package of things that are very relevant to a lot of other disciplines in the world today, apart from architecture. But still, there's sort of this, I guess, fascination as an architecture student with becoming a Le Corbusier or like another star architect, to those architecture students who might be, they're not, but let's pretend that they're listening to this podcast. How can we be helpful? Like, what can we advise or say, or, you know, to get them to shift their focus or at least explore different disciplines and become part of that, as you said, like the new conversation? How can we help them?
I think it's always good for them to, it's fine to want to go to, to architectural firm, and they can do that definitely. But I will say that they should also recognize themselves as designers, focus on what they know and what they know to do and their skills, and see that that can be a contribution in other disciplines and in other type of projects. For example, there's new, as we talked before, there's new disciplines, design discipline like user experience design, interaction design,
Hmm.
that are emerging, or positions for architects within, experiential agencies, or within, labs at Google, or like positions that require someone to think about the space in the context of different type of products or services.
Yeah.
So my advice would be for them to probably, some of them will be, creating their portfolios and looking for, jobs,
Hmm.
to kind of step back a little bit. And of course, you can always present these buildings that you design for studio and all that, but like also show a little bit their thinking process and their skills, and open up to other opportunities. And I forgot to mention that within that, a space of opportunity, of course, the idea of being an entrepreneur could be definitely
Hmm.
an option. Today, I think there's a bunch of opportunities for designers to be, engaged either in projects with the or built environment, startups, and and there's like funding, supporting projects that will have an impact on the city,
Yeah.
on the space.
Hmm.
And I think this is going to happen. People are
Yeah.
going to be developing these products, and then I think architects are the ones that should be part of this conversation, and should be, open to go and look for those opportunities.
Hmm.
uh, and of course, there's always, you can always, you know then also work in architectural firms, that by the way, also architectural firms started integrating innovation, labs within their practices. And there's another place there to, become a leader and become someone that, participates in expanding the the scope of what an architecture firm can provide as a service.
Yeah.
And then you have all the, research and educational side, bunch of design schools that I think where architects are will be very well welcome to contribute, because they have like this, skills that we were talking about. um,
Yeah, I think I would even say before you finish, before you graduate, from architecture school, use that time to not just only focus on architecture, but also explore other disciplines. So yeah, do an internship at IDEO or Fjord or Frog, or any one of those strategic design / innovation agencies. I think that's super valuable. Because I think that at the end of the day, what they're missing is one is the context, right? Like you can apply your skills and mind, like your skills and mindset to other areas, other disciplines. So that context, I think they need to get that somewhere, and they will only get it by stepping out of their own, comfort zone, which is architecture and designing, like within those four walls. Um,
Yeah, and within the schools too, they probably one of the cool things about going to MIT is that, remember that in our program we didn't have many requirements, so we were able to jump into
yes,
classes on science. Architects should learn how to program. I mean, that's something that is basic in today's world and in the
that's true.
future.
Yeah.
They should take courses in business school, in entrepreneurship, learn about how to make a business plan, learn.
That's
uh,
critical. That's the other thing
yeah,
I wanted to mention. Exactly. I think most of them are missing like the business of design. Like how do you build a venture? Like, okay, you came up with the solution, great. You presented it at a charrette or a crit, but then if it's good and you were getting good feedback, how do you turn that into a business?
exactly. And I will say, even knowing about the business from the beginning, it's also a good way to start, because then you just don't come up with something that is completely disconnected to the reality,
Hmm.
but could be could be informed by certain markets, or your
Yeah,
particular users or business opportunities,
exactly.
which are really could be a good starting point.
Yeah.
So it's not something that you can always bring it at the end, but I think it's always good to have that from the beginning. And even before that, we can talk about, also before you come to architecture school, maybe you can think about that you wanna use architecture school as a way for you to to get into, and you can go through architecture school and design buildings, but knowing that you're learning that how to design, and you're learning other things.
Yeah.
And architecture school could be a vehicle for you to become a great designer, and
Yeah.
maybe you want to end up being a fashion designer, end up being a web designer later. and,
Exactly.
and today you're interested into that as a
Mhm.
before going to school, but you can see that maybe one of the best design education that you can get it through going through architecture school. uh,
And I want to say to the maybe perhaps some of our listeners are within corporates, right, large organizations, and are looking for that sort of talent. I would encourage you to go to your local architecture school or program, right, and sit through or sit in a crit, okay, this sort of review, and listen to what's happening there, observe, interact. And I think that if at some point you can create perhaps a pilot program of pulling in some of those students, that you can kind of see that they're sort of round, right, in how they approach the discipline of architecture. So you can take them and fairly easily, shift their focus from architecture to what your business is trying to do. I would encourage you to do that. I would encourage you to start a program like that, but because you're not going to regret it. I think those architecture students will be fantastic assets for what you're trying to do in your organization.
Even walking around the studio and see how people, how they're working in prototypes on their desk,
Yeah.
how they're showing things to each other, how the professor is walking around and giving feedback. it's
Yeah.
a it's a very rich environment. That, if you think about it, the media lab, basically the Nicolas Negroponte, who came from the architecture machine and from the architecture school, replicated the architecture studio model, but without the buildings, right? And
Exactly.
where designing new technologies. But the media lab, if you walk around the media lab and people are like, oh, the media lab is amazing, it's basically an architecture school.
Yeah.
Where in the tables, instead of buildings, they have prototypes for different type of interfaces and technologies and things
That's
like that.
so true. That's so true.
Yeah,
So can you share like a few things about what you're doing in a case with the entrepreneurship program for architects? Is there a program for that?
it's really early on.
Hmm.
I think the main effort that we're looking right now is that this program probably will be directed towards designers slash architects. So basically, a lot of the programs out there for entrepreneurship is trying to teach basically design to non-designers. These programs we want to focus on teaching entrepreneurs to or business to designers. So it's kind of the other way around.
Right.
So we need to think through that process of, like, it's not the design thinking process where, okay, we need to set up this, this template so that business people feel comfortable with the design process. Is maybe we need to think about another template
Mm.
for designers to feel comfortable with the business process. So it's very early on to define how this is going to happen, but we think that uh, there's a bunch of opportunities, and you are also working in that space on, like, all these students working on great projects and creating amazing ideas in the studios, or at case we are kind of it's not only about buildings, we also develop other type of, technologies and things, and
Hmm.
then you want to use those projects and maybe develop them as, as a startup, or, and get applied to an accelerator, incubator, and kind of connecting that process with the projects that you are kind of coming up with in your as you're being a student. That kind of like kind
Hmm.
of the space we want to explore.
We
And
probably have like another 2 or 3 more hours of material to go through, but I think we're gonna leave that to episode, future episode. Let's just leave it at that.
we need to do one with Christine.
We
That's the
need,
thing.
yes, that's a great idea. Although I think like she's too busy,
She's too important for
she's too
us.
important. She's yeah.
Maybe she can come in at the end and review our podcast, give us feedback.
You know what? I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna send this to her and ask. Like, this will be an episode in itself. Christine comments on Yaniv and Daniel talking shit about architecture.
Exactly. Could be made.
So, listen, if people, listeners, want to get in touch with you, learn more about you, what's the best way?
Best way will be to send me an email. I think that would be the easiest at Daniel at phantasma.tech.
Hmm.
Uh, that would be the best way to contact me.
Okay.
Yeah, or come to Case at Brooklyn. You can come. It's in Industry City in Brooklyn,
There you go.
and you can just come to our lab and say hi and see what we're doing over there.
Yeah.
We can go get some ramen.
Perfect. Perfect. Now you're getting me excited, and I wish I could get on a plane and come visit you and see what you're up to because it sounds amazing. And we will do that. We will do that at some point. So, Daniel, I'm gonna put your email in the show notes. Thank you so much for being on the show today, man.
Thank you for inviting me. I hope I didn't disappoint you.
You did not, my friend.
It's fine if I did. It's fine.
You don't care.